My name is Katie Reiter, and I am the National Program Director for Jews for Secular Democracy. Welcome to Fighting for Religious Freedom, How to Speak to and Actually Be Heard by Your State Legislator. This webinar is part of our ongoing Jewish Women and Religious Freedom Project in Florida and is proudly grant supported by the Jewish Women's Foundation of the Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County. It is also co-sponsored by the National Council of Jewish Women, Greater Miami Section, by the Society for Humanistic Judaism, Temple Israel Orlando, Congregation Beth Adam, Florida National Organization for Women, the Jewish Federation of Broward County Community Relations Council, and Florida Freedom to Read. So welcome. Tonight's presenter is my friend and co-worker, Sarah Levin. Sarah is the Director of Strategy at Jews for a Secular Democracy and is the founder and principal of Secular Strategies, a consulting firm specializing in mobilizing the non-religious and advocating for separation of church and state. Sarah worked for the Secular Coalition for America from 2013 through 2019 in various roles, including Director of Grassroots and Community Programs and Director of Governmental Affairs. Sarah graduated with a bachelor's degree in international studies from American University, which I also have a degree from, where she served on the leadership board of the university's Secular Student Alliance affiliate. A proud and first-generation American, Sarah is the daughter of Jewish immigrants from Ukraine and Belarus. She is thrilled at the opportunity to lend her professional experience to a cause that hits home. Take it away, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to see you all here. My goal today is to really demystify the process of contacting elected officials. A lot of folks are intimidated by the idea of doing it, but it is just so highly impactful. And you don't have to be a professional lobbyist to do it. And so we're going to get into some nitty-gritty details today about how to set up a meeting, how to prepare and have that meeting. We're also going to get into emails and phone calls. And I'm really glad we have Katie here today because she's been on the other side of that as a staffer for a legislator. So she can talk about what it's like on her end. And I'll be talking about, what it's like on the advocate's end. So hopefully the slideshow will work like it did right before. Oh, 1 second. We're going to start by talking about religious freedom. Can you see the screen? Awesome. Okay. So what is religious freedom? Where does the constitutional right to religious freedom actually derive from? Well, it's actually the very first line of the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. So what does the first line of the First Amendment say? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That is what we refer to, just that first line is the Establishment Clause, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And that clause is referred to as the Free Exercise Clause. Now, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause are the foundation of what Thomas Jefferson famously coined as the wall of separation between church and state. So if you ever hear Christian nationalists, people who, are against separation of religion and government say, oh, it's not even in the Constitution. It's really just what they're saying is those exact words of wall of separation is not in there, but this is very much the basis. And we have lots of documentations that was very much the intention of the founders was to have a separation between religion and government. And the reason it's important to understand both of these clauses is because they are interdependent. So the Establishment Clause means that the government can't promote or endorse a specific religion. That also means that we have freedom from religion, right? Because the government amplifying, endorsing, privileging is the word I'm looking for. Privileging any particular set of views is always going to be to the detriment of people who don't belong to that religious tradition, and non-believers, as well as people of that denomination. If the government is promoting Christianity, there's just no way they're even going to be, that those policies are going to be reflective of all Christians, right? Because there's multiple denominations, multiple interpretations of scripture. So the Establishment Clause is ensuring that the government doesn't become a tool to impose or promote of specific views over others. And free exercise means, exactly what it sounds like, that we have the right to exercise our beliefs, and the government shouldn't prevent us from worshiping, praying, or from being a non-believer, from being a humanist. But like all civil rights, they're not limitless, right? We've all heard of the famous, you can't yell fire in a theater, right? Even free speech, for example, has its limits, right? You can't incite violence, for example. Well, I think when it comes to religious freedom, at least from our perspective, and I think a lot of people who study the Constitution would agree, that free exercise is not supposed to be limitless. If your free exercise means that you are, in your free exercise of religion, imposing your views on another person and keeping them from exercising their beliefs, that's the line, right? And our opposition, white Christian nationalists, are very much and have been very successful at chipping away at the constitutional basis for the separation of religion and government, and that protection from other people imposing their beliefs on us. So what they've really done by stacking the courts with people who share their ideological beliefs is they've basically set precedent after precedent that makes the free exercise clause supersede the establishment clause, and kind of ignores that very important limit where you're exercising beliefs and then imposing them on someone else in a way that is undermining their civil rights, whether it's their religious freedom rights or other rights that are enumerated in the Constitution. So that's where we have a problem, is we do have a constitutional basis for separation of church and state, but the active effort by Christian nationalists over the past few decades to stack the courts with people who do not support the idea that this is what the First Amendment is about, and that are chipping away by having the free exercise clause just take a whole life of its own and completely ignoring the establishment clause. That's where we've seen just so much unprecedented attacks on our religious freedom. So that's what we're really want to be talking to our elected officials about. And at the end of the presentation, I will share just a few examples of how we're seeing religious freedom attacked in Florida specifically. I'll share a few positive bills that we could be supporting at the federal level in Congress. And I'll also be showing you just a few different issue areas where religious freedom connects to a lot of issues, of course, including reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, but also a number of other issues that you might not think of kind of at the surface of, the culture war. But really, almost every area of policy has been affected by the Christian nationalist agenda, and religious freedom at large really impacts our lives in a lot of different ways beyond healthcare. So we're going to dive in now into the nitty gritty. But before I do that, I do want to just generally explain the difference between lobbying and advocacy. So at a high level, the way to think about it, that all lobbying is a type of advocacy, because advocacy is really just trying to make change. And there's a lot of different ways you can make change. One of them is talking to elected officials, talking to the people who have the influence, the authority to change a law, to change regulations. But there's also a lot of other types of advocacy. Educating the public and raising awareness is a type of advocacy. Voting is a type of advocacy. Getting out the vote is a type of advocacy. Talking to media and getting media to cover an issue is also advocacy. So advocacy is very, very broad, but lobbying and constituent outreach to elected officials is just one way to make a really big difference. And it's an important one, of course, because you're talking to the people who can actually make the change. So not all advocacy is lobbying, but all lobbying is advocacy. Every state has a different definition of lobbying, and it generally means attempting to influence legislation or administrative action. And in Florida, it also includes encouraging others to do so if you as an individual or the group you're with is being compensated for that purpose. So if you're a volunteer, you're not getting paid, and you're encouraging other people without being compensated to contact their elected officials, most likely it's not going to be considered lobbying. And then if you're here with if you're a member of a congregation or an organization that's a 501c3, a really common question we get and a concern is whether or not it's okay and legal for you to go talk to your elected officials about an issue. So first of all, if you're just talking about issues, and you absolutely, it's not lobbying. If you're just talking about things you care about, your values, that's not lobbying. If you're talking about a specific bill or administrative action, it is, but that's still legal for a 501c3 to do, just with limitations. And, I'm not an attorney, so this is not legal advice, but I really encourage folks who belong to C3s not to be overly cautious and not to just write off the idea of engaging in lobbying, because it is so impactful and you can do quite a bit of it legally. You just need to consult an attorney, make sure you understand how to track that time, how to know when you're lobbying, when you're not. Our opposition certainly does not limit themselves at all. And we're going to get into in the next slide, actually, why it is so important for us to all within the legal bounds do as much as we can to make our voices heard. Oop, here we go. So why do we talk to our elected officials? If you don't speak out, someone else speaks for you. So if we are not out there talking to our elected officials about religious freedom, about the issues we care about, you can bet that our opposition, white Christian nationalists, people who want to impose their beliefs on us, they are doing that. And you don't want to contribute to that vacuum. We have a lot of issues in the US where the majority of people are over here, but the policy doesn't reflect it, because we have a lot of silent majority issues, right? Where you have a lot of people behind an issue, but the people who are really out there talking to elected officials, showing up, are the vocal minority. But at the end of the day, you could go and show a poll to an elected official and say, look, the majority of Floridians feel this way about the issue. But if that's not reflected in who is organized in their district, who is speaking out, who is voting, then that's not really going to matter as much. So the squeaky wheel really does get the grease. It is important to be vocal, to show up. Even if you think that, you're in the majority, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the viewpoint that's getting heard. And then if you're in an area where you are the minority, right? And you feel like you're not going to be, you're just up against a lot more people, a lot more voices. It's still important to get involved and to make your voice heard for a few reasons, and two big ones. One is that you have to play the long game. I mean, think about, just for example, Georgia, right? That state flipping from red to blue. That did not happen overnight. There were people on the ground working to organize for many, many, many years before that happened, right? So you have to have a vision for the long term, especially I think when we're talking about issues like religious freedom and separation of religion and government and reproductive health care. The culture is with us, right? Our ideas are the ones that are really popular, right? So building that grassroots infrastructure is really important, because you may not win today or tomorrow, but you have to play the long game there. And then visibility is important too. Whether you're with a nonprofit, a congregation, it's really important that your elected officials know that you exist in the district, that you're a community that's on their radar. Something that elected officials often do is to visit local communities and meet those constituents. And so it's important that they know that you're in the district, that you're on their radar, and that the mission that you have, that the members that you have in their district are visible to the elected official who is there to represent you. So what we're going to start talking about now is having a meeting, how to prepare, how to schedule the meeting. But I first want to say that this is the most impactful thing that you can do. And it is also something that is not done very often by constituents. And because it's something that is not, that most people don't do, the people who do it have kind of an outsized voice and an outsized role in policy. So I really, really encourage you, as much as it might sound intimidating, I hope if I do my job, it will sound less intimidating after we get through this. Really, really consider, even just once a year, visiting your elected official in their district office. And Katie can confirm that this is something that really is impactful from the other side. So let me start with scheduling the meeting. So whether it's your federal, your state, your local official, maybe at the local level it might be a little bit different, but starting with federal, all of your members of Congress are going to have an office in the Capitol. in DC, but they're also going to have a district office, maybe more than one. So first thing to do is just look up, if you don't know who your member of Congress is, look them up, see where their district office is, because chances are it's not too far from you. Same thing with your state officials. They're going to have district offices. So see where those are and reach out and call and say that you want to have a meeting and schedule it. It's going to be during business hours, I will say. That is the unfortunate thing. So it is something that you're going to have to schedule some time during the week. But typically these kinds of meetings are 10 or 15 minutes, half an hour maximum. So this is something you can do on your lunch break. So what are you going to do to schedule that meeting? Well, you're going to have a reason that you want to meet, an issue that you want to discuss. And the first thing you want to do when you call is to say, my name is Sarah Levin and I'm a constituent. I live in, X area of the district, because they're going to want to know that you're a constituent. And then you're going to say, I'd like to schedule a meeting with the senator, with the assembly member, or someone on your staff to discuss XYZ. Now, just because you might not get a meeting with the legislator themselves, that's actually okay. A lot of people get, offended or think that, you're not treated as important because you don't get a meeting with the legislator themselves. But actually, meeting with staff is huge. It is so helpful because these are the folks that are actually doing the work. They're the ones who are doing, making recommendations to their bosses. They're probably going to know a lot more about the issue or the bill that you want to discuss in greater detail than the legislator will. So I always offer that option because, of course, it's great to meet the elected official and build that relationship. But I also say, or whom on your staff, because I would, a lot of times, if, for example, if I'm there to talk about a healthcare issue, I'd rather talk to the staffer who handles healthcare, it is their job to have a little bit more information about the bills on healthcare that are active than their boss, who is maybe just at a very high level going to really know a lot about the issue. Katie, do you want to just quickly jump in from your perspective in a Senate office on that?
Yes, I 100% agree with that. The staff, especially the chief of staff, the legislative director, they often have the in-depth knowledge on specific pieces of legislation or specific areas in the appropriations bills. And if you can get a meeting with them, they usually have a little bit more time, so they're more able to really listen to everything you have to say. I think people really lose out if they don't meet with the staff.
Thank you for that. You heard her from Katie. She's on the other side of that. So the one other thing I do want to mention before I get into preparation for the meeting, once you have it scheduled, is that, elected officials are human beings. They don't have expertise on everything. They're going to have this much expertise on this many things, but they're going to be very surface level on the rest. And then even with staff, right? And it depends on the office, how much staff they have. Let's say they have 2 or 3 people. Well, each of those people is going to be assigned a few different issue areas that they're responsible for. But even then, they're only going to have so much expertise on so many issues, right? So this is actually where lobbying and reaching out to your elected officials is so impactful, is that because they only have so much subject matter expertise on an issue, they actually do rely quite a bit on outside organizations and constituents to bring information to them. So if you can establish yourself as a trusted subject matter expert or somebody who can at least bring those resources to them, that's helpful to them. Right. And then you now have positioned yourself as someone who can influence that office on that issue. And over time, as you build a relationship and you become known to that office as a resource on the issue, they might start calling you when a bill comes up and ask for your opinion or ask if you have resources, because it's also part of their job to understand who's for, who's against, who are the winners, who are the losers of this policy. Right. So being one of those trusted, reliable, consistent voices on the issue that's giving them good information, that's a huge way to build power. So, and over time, because it's not just about urging them to vote for or against, it's also about educating them on an issue, especially if it's an issue that's maybe not even on their radar. I've had constituents reach out on issues that were, not the hot button issue of the day. And their office had to, as a result, not send a form letter and have kind of form a position on the issue, right? If it's the first time that it's been brought to their attention, then they actually have to be forced to look into it and think about what their position is. How are they going to respond to that constituent? Okay, so you have called the office, you have scheduled your meeting. How are you going to prepare for that meeting? So most important thing is to, first of all, of course, you want to know the facts, right? So if you're going to be talking about a specific bill, specific issue, you want to have a pretty good knowledge of the issue. Now, you don't have to be the subject matter expert, right? You don't have to know everything, but you do have to know the high level talking points of, for example, if you're talking about a bill, what does the bill do? What problem is it trying to solve, right? You have to have that elevator pitch of what it does. And you might want to understand what the opposing side is saying, because you want to be able to rebut those points. It's also helpful to know the history, right? So has this bill come up before? Did it fail last year? Why did it fail? And you also want to know, so you basically want to do your homework on the legislator. So is this legislator someone, have they taken a position on the bill before? Because if they supported it before, it's going to be very different, and you support it, then that's going to be a very different conversation than they've opposed it in the past and you're trying to persuade them, right? Is this a legislator who's on a committee that is going to be hearing this bill? So if it's an education bill, are they on the education committee, right? So just knowing those basic facts going in, so you know who you're meeting with. So when you're preparing, you want to have those facts ready, and it's really helpful if you have what we call leave behinds. So 1 or 2 page documents that you can physically leave with them. Often if it's a big issue, that big organizations, established organizations are working on, they're probably going to have that for you, or you can reach out and ask them, do you have a 1-pager that I can bring with me? So you've familiarized yourself with the talking points, and also you want to talk about not just, okay, this is why you should vote for the bill, XYZ talking point, this is how it's going to solve this problem. You also want to talk about your values and your personal connection. Remember, you're meeting with a human being, and human beings are compelled by stories. So if you can talk about how this issue impacts you, or impacts your loved ones, impacts your community, how it speaks to your core values, that is going to be a lot more memorable, and sometimes is even more persuasive than the facts, because human beings are not always rational actors, and we are very much moved by emotions and not just facts. But of course, you want to have both. You want to have the talking points and your personal connection. One of the biggest things that I think keeps people from doing this is this fear that you're going to get asked a question that you don't know the answer to, or you don't know every possible thing you could know about the issue. But it is so perfectly okay if you get asked a question about the bill to say, I don't know the answer, but I will get back to you. That is totally fine, as long as you actually do find the answer and then follow up later and provide that information, which really does reinforce that you can be a trusted source of information. Never make it up if you're not sure. Don't fudge it, right? Because ultimately your integrity as a source of information is really how you're building the base of that relationship. Okay, so I think we've covered everything here. Before I move on to the day of the meeting, Katie, is there anything you want to share a little bit more about just kind of like knowing, like it being okay to not know everything, and kind of the expectations from the point of view of a staffer like yourself when you're meeting with constituents?
It's very okay to not know everything. In fact, we wouldn't expect people to come in and know everything. So I think what you said of speaking your story and speaking your truth is really important. And I would say even practice your story a little bit, because your story is powerful. And coming in and speaking it clearly and trying to make that personal connection with either the staffer or the legislator is really important. And excuse me, I can tell you, in the office I worked for, sometimes that made a difference, because there are a lot of issues. Like, you wouldn't think this, but there are really a lot of issues that my boss didn't really have a stance on. The stop sign in this place or something, and someone can come in and really have a personal story and just be honest and open, and it made a big difference. So sometimes so I think that's very important. I think the other point you made about know your legislator is also really important. Know what, look them up and do a little research on them. What are their values? What do they care about? What kind of legislation have they introduced before or co-sponsored? What is their voting record? Because you're not going to get someone who, let's say, is a National Rifle Association lifetime member and has always done this to come in and join you on a whole bunch of gun violence prevention efforts. You can speak to them and they might be willing to listen, but you have to know like what's kind of realistic. So your ask has to be realistic based on what their core values are. So I think it's really important to know what their core values are and how to speak to those core values. Try to find a place of common ground as you start your conversation with them. I think this is excellent, Sarah. It's exactly what to do.
Absolutely. And you know, you just made me think of a really good example of why that homework is really important too. When I was lobbying on the Johnson Amendment in Congress, you know, we would tailor our talking points a little bit depending on which office we were
Good.
talking about. So, or talking to. So, you know, with more progressive offices, we might talk a little bit more about the church-state separation aspect of it, whereas we might talk about transparency and, you know, different, emphasize different things with more conservative offices on the issue, right?
Absolutely. For example, my boss was a former engineer. She liked facts. So if you can come and you've got statistics, she wants to hear that. That helps. Some other places, they don't really care about the facts. I mean, I'm not saying that in a bad way, but it's just not what motivates them. So you have to kind of know your legislator and what motivates them, and that will really help you make your case.
Absolutely. And I'll tell one other anecdote because I think it really drives home the importance of establishing yourself as a great source of information. I was once lobbying on the DC Death with Dignity Act, and I was meeting with a council member's office who had been misinformed about the bill by the opposition. So because I knew the facts of the bill, right, when they said, well, we're concerned that this is going to be used by people with diabetes. And that was just false information. It would only be people who with a terminal illness with 6 months or less to live would be the only people eligible for this option. And by the way, it was a 6-page bill. So they had clearly even not read it, right? And it wasn't a long one, and this is again, like that happens often. Like they may not read the whole thing, which means that because they have so many bills very long bills to vote on, right? On every single issue, including those that are not in their area of expertise. So that was a scenario where they were lied to about what was in the bill and they believed it. And had I not gone in there and inform them of what the bill actually did, not only would they maybe have continued to believe something false, but the other thing I did in that moment was establish that the nonprofit and the organizations I was with were the trusted source. Do you think they're ever going to listen to the opposition that came in and lied to them ever again? Probably not, right? So very important to know your facts and to realize the power of just being the organization or the person that's giving them that information.
Absolutely. I can tell you just I want to speak to what you
Oh,
just said
please
really
go ahead.
quickly. Um, Many bills are very long, 250 pages, even some that are 12 pages. I mean, they're very dense, they're very thick, and most legislators, not all, many do not read all the bills. They just don't. They read the write-up that the caucus staff gave them, or they read the write-up that their legislative director gave them. They might skim the bill, but a lot of them have not read it line by line. So if you can come in and have a copy of the bill or have those facts presenting, that's a big deal. And they will listen and that can change minds.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so you've scheduled your meeting. A few things to know about preparing for it. So first of all, I mean, I know we're in a post-COVID world, so maybe this has changed, but I still believe you should dress like you are dressing for an interview out of respect for the office. So dress how you would for an interview professionally. Know who you're meeting with. Walk in and let them know, again, you're a constituent. My name is Sarah Levin. I'm a constituent. I'm here to meet with so-and-so. Now, this is really important. We've talked about how meeting with staffers is just as important. Be very polite and nice to the person at the front desk. Even if you think they might not be important, first of all, you don't know who they are and what their role is. You can't assume that just because they're working the phones that they're not an important person in the office, especially if it's small. But even if they are, if they're an intern, it is not a good idea to treat staff rudely or badly, because that can really hinder what you're trying to do. So be nice to everyone, because all the staff there can act as a gatekeeper. Of course, be on time. If you are meeting with other constituents in a group, which I highly encourage. So if this is something you're doing, you know that there are other constituents, maybe other members of your organization in your district, it's really, really great to go together, because they see you and they multiply you in their minds. Like, okay, there's two constituents here from this organization or around this issue, so there must be, 10 times more of them or 100 times more of them, if they're, again, because so few people do this, so few people actually take the time to do this, that they recognize this is a really engaged constituency if they're taking the time to come in and see us. So if you are in a group, which I do encourage, just decide who's going to be the primary speaker, or who's going to talk about what, because you don't want to be talking over each other, especially because you're not going to have necessarily a lot of time. If you're meeting with the elected official, it could be 10 or 15 minutes. And with staff, it might be up to half an hour. So just be a little bit organized beforehand. So the meeting has started. The first thing you want to open with is a thank you. At a base level, just thank them for their time. But this is where that homework comes in too. Even if it's not related to the issue you're there to talk about, if you can find anything to thank them for, maybe it's a different bill they supported or an issue that they're vocal on, it just really helps to be able to thank them for something, and sets a good tone for the meeting. So start with the thank you, introduce yourself and the organization you're with, if you are with an organization and its mission, and then you get into why you wanted to meet with them today. And by the way, that opportunity to talk about your organization is really great. Again, getting that visibility factor of getting your local organization on the map. It's a great way to educate them about constituents and constituent activism in their district. So you go into the reason I wanted to meet with you today. You get into your top level points. We're hoping that that Senator so-and-so, Representative so-and-so will vote yes on this, or will vote no on this. And you want to share those top talking points, and then you want to get into those personal stories, right? You get to the facts, but then you get to your personal connection to the stories, how it resonates with your values, how it impacts you or other people in the community. And then you want to make sure you get to the ask, right? So you're there to talk about an issue, top level facts, your personal experience, and then make sure you say the thing, right? We want you to vote against this bill. We want you to support this bill, right? So you want to make sure you make the actual ask. Then once you're done and you've made that ask, you ask if they have any questions. And of course, it's a conversation and every staffer or legislator is different. Maybe by this point they've interrupted you and asked questions already. Maybe they've been silent the whole time. Maybe they don't have questions. But if they haven't asked any questions at this point, ask them if they do. And of course, again, if you don't know the answer, that's okay. Say, I don't know the answer, but I'd be happy to get back to you. Write down what that question was and make sure, we'll get to the follow-up in a second, that you follow up for that. Now, this part right here, so you thank them for their time, you're getting out the door, make sure, so important, that you ask for a business card. Ask them for the best, I have here ask for the best email to follow up, but actually I should change this and say ask for their business card, because this is the difference between contacting an office on their general web form. Once you have the staffer's business card, or if it's the elected official, they might give you their own, or they might give you their chief of staffs, for example. Now you have a personal email address to contact, and that makes a huge difference in kind of cutting through the noise of all the emails they get through their website web form. And then you can build that relationship through email, because they have a face to a name, they've met you, they've gotten an email from you, and you continue to directly have a relationship with that staffer. Katie, do you want to add anything to that? Because I know we were talking about how important this is the other day.
Sorry, it takes me a minute to come back on. No, I think this is this is excellent. I love the idea of opening with a thank you, even if the thank you is just thank you for listening to me, because it sets the groundwork. And making the ask. I was always surprised by the people who came in and told us a story and told us their feelings and gave us some facts and then didn't make an ask. And I always, because I've been an advocate for a long time, would say to them, what is it that you want? Because people would forget to make the ask. And it's not always, as simple as one, two, three. It might be a little bit more complicated and ask, and people kind of forget. I think they get overwhelmed. We also have very short time periods. Sometimes there were days where we had many days, or we would have 20 meetings in a day, in addition to trying to fit in committee meetings and staff briefings, all the other things. So we were moving people through. And if you kind of came and didn't make an ask, we wouldn't know what to do with that information.
Right, exactly. And if you don't mind, while you're still on, Katie, can you tell your intern story? Because that was just a brilliant example of like, be nice to who's at the front
Oh,
desk.
at the front desk story.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I won't say who, but there was a national nonprofit that we were very supportive of. And they did have a meeting with my boss, but I can't remember why she was called away. It might have been a committee hearing. I don't remember. And I couldn't do it. And our legislative director couldn't do it. But our constituent services director, who was our front desker that day, could. So he took the meeting, but they were unbelievably rude to him. Dismissive. Why are you the one handling this meeting? We don't want to meet with you. Just were very rude to him. And I guarantee you, we had a meeting about that meeting, and it definitely impacted how we related to that nonprofit the rest of the time I was there.
You heard it directly from Katie, and that was a nonprofit they worked with and supported. So do
Yeah.
not underestimate the impact of how you treat the staff, no matter who they are. Always
Yeah,
treat them.
including interns. Our interns were often college students, and sometimes even people who we were calling and we were agreeing with their issue, but they would be really rude to the interns, swear at them, or yeah, we called names, just hang up on them. Well, I'm not going to talk to you. I want to talk to a real person. Be very rude, and then we wouldn't meet with them, because if you're going to treat a young staffer like that, we're just not going to meet with you.
That's right. Okay. Thank you for that, Katie. Okay, so the meeting is done. What do you do now? So hopefully you've got a business card. And you're going to be ideally within 2 days of the meeting, you're going to be sending a follow-up thank you note. Now this is a no, when I say thank you note, I don't mean a written one. I mean an email. I did get asked the other day about, written thank you notes. I honestly don't know what it's like at the state and local level right now. I do know that I kind of discourage written notes to Congress these days, just because it takes way too long. There were, all the anthrax like scares, and there's just the level of security that goes into vetting the mail. It's just going to take forever, and it's really important. I mean, you just heard Katie say that like it was very typical of her to have like 20 meetings in a day, right? I mean, by the time it's next week or weeks later, they're barely going to even remember who you were and what you talked about, right? So you really do want to follow up pretty quickly within the meeting. If you can, after the meeting, if you can do it the same day, that's great. But generally within two business days is great. With that email that you got in their business card, you start by saying, thank you so much again for meeting with me. And then reiterate, what you discussed, which is also helpful when they, months later, weeks later, go back and it's like, oh, we talked about that, right? So you want to kind of just reiterate, we really appreciated you taking the time to discuss XYZ with us. If you have a digital version of the leave behind that you gave them, it's always nice to just attach it to that email as well and say, just in case, I have this attached. If you need any more information, please don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, so now you've built a relationship, you've had a meeting, you have their direct email address. If you just do that once a year, the rest of the year, you can be communicating with this office via email about this issue or this bill. So let's say You know, there's lots of excuses to follow up. Let's say the editorial board of your newspaper just did an article on that issue. You could send it their way and you know, reply. I like to reply to the same email thread because it kind of jogs their memory of who you are. You could just hit that reply button and say, you know, wanted to make sure that you saw this. Please let me know if you want any more information, right? If there's movement on the bill, anything related to that issue or other issues pertaining to religious freedom or whatever you're advocating on. So keep that relationship going. Because the other thing that does is if you're every once in a while giving them an update on the bill or the issue, again, you're reinforcing that you're a source of information that they can trust. Okay, great. So we've covered meetings. Now we're going to talk about phone calls and we're going to talk about emails. So again, the best thing you can do is an in-person meeting. So I really hope that you'll all consider doing that. But phone calls, I would say, are second best after that. So you can call their office. And if they don't answer, you can leave a voicemail if no one's available. And make sure that you're calling your elected officials. Other offices, if you are not a constituent, they do not really care what you have to say. Ultimately, they care about their own constituents, their own voters. There's very few exceptions when it makes sense to call an elected official who is not your elected official. Excuse me, that might be leadership. You know, you might want to call leadership, the majority leader, for example, urging them to bring a bill to the floor. You might occasionally want to call the committee chair to urge them to stop a bill from moving through committee or urge them to move it through committee, urge them to have a hearing on a bill. But with those very few exceptions of leadership who are impacting a bill, who are not your elected official, do not call somebody else's elected official. Call yours. So what does that phone call look like? You start with your name, mention your constituent, and where in the district you live. It might sound very familiar, like I'm repeating myself, because it's actually just a condensed version of the things you would do in a meeting, right? My name is Sarah Levin. I'm a constituent. I live in Mar Vista, you know, off of Venice. I'm calling to urge Assemblymember Bryan to support XYZ bill. Then you give your top talking points of you know 2 or 3 reasons why you want them to support or oppose it, and then you bring in that personal story. So I would say, you know, I urge the senator to vote this way on the bill. Point. As a humanistic Jew who cares deeply about the separation of religion and government, this issue is really important to me because XYZ. Or, you know, as a woman, access to abortion is an essential right. My bodily autonomy is really important to me. You know, whatever issue it is, connecting it to you personally, which we talked about before, right? It's just a condensed version of it, right? 1 or 2 reasons, you know, or the personal story. And then if it's not something connected to you personally, how are others in the district impacted? So if I was, you know, calling my assembly member about some initiative around homelessness, I could say, you know, I know there's a lot of unhoused people in my district who, if given the opportunity to housing and wraparound services, could have an opportunity for a better life. And, you know, I believe every human being should have the opportunity to reach their full potential, right? Something like that. And then reiterate the ask at the end, right? So it's never a bad idea to repeat, right? So you started with the ask, top talking points, personal connection, and I hope that the senator will consider supporting this bill. If someone is on the phone, usually they might interrupt you to ask for your address sometimes. Don't be thrown off. If they're asking for your address, it's because they want to confirm that you're a constituent, and they might be marking in their system that you called for their records. They will listen to you, and then they'll probably say something along the lines of, you know, thanks so much for calling. I'll pass along I'll pass this along to our chief of staff or to the office. So that's a phone call. Again, it's very much like a meeting. It's just a much more condensed version. Don't forget to start with the fact that you're a constituent, because that's gonna, you know, basically signal that they should be listening to you for the rest of that phone call. If you forget that part, they probably will interrupt to ask where in the district you live. So that's a phone call. An email is very similar. You just have, it is more condensed than the meeting. You can have a little more information than you would share in a phone call, but not too much. So before I get into that, there are 2 methods for email. One is going to the website of the legislator and using their general, they might have a general email address, or they might have like a web form, like a form that you fill out. That's great, but even better is getting a staffer's direct email address. So how do you do that? If it's not on the website, which typically it's not, you can either, have this be a follow-up email from the meeting, which is what I mostly recommend. But if you can't do the meeting, what you can do is you can call the office and say, my name is Sarah Levin. I'm a constituent. I want to send a note to your to whoever on your staff handles healthcare. Who would be the best person to email? And that way you can get the direct email address, but it's not a guarantee that they will give it to you. This doesn't always work. So what they might do is tell you to contact the general mailbox. And if they do, that's okay. Don't get upset. Don't be rude. Just say, sure thing, I will do that. And then go back to the general mailbox. And if you don't get a response within a week and a half, then you can call and say, hi, I called the other week. I was hoping to talk to somebody about this issue. I did use the general mailbox, but I haven't heard back. Who would be the best person to follow up with? Because they want you to like go through their process, right? So again, stay very polite, but sometimes it takes a few tries to get an actual email address for a person. And if it's their process that they want you to contact the general mailbox, you do that. And if you don't hear back, you just follow up until you get that response. So you're writing the email. Subject line should get straight to the point because, and I'd be curious, Katie, your thoughts on this. A lot of people don't actually read the whole email. So you want to make sure that if they're not even going to read it, that they know what it's about in the subject line.
Yeah, 100%. Everybody has constituent services software that kind of sorts your emails. So it will see the subject line and sort it. So it might just be, wow, we got 35 emails to support Senate Bill 605, and we got 2 that don't. They might not have been read. They might have been glanced at, but if you're getting, 1,000 emails a week in an office with 3 staffers, they don't have time to deep read. But they do have the software does sort and it does help. So they might then go in and dig, like, I want to see what these support people are saying and dig through some, or I want to see what these anti people are saying. So having a really good subject line helps, because sometimes the software will take it and put it into kind of junk mail because it's not, the subject line is incomprehensible, or it's not appropriate, or it says something that doesn't really make sense. And then depending on how busy the office is, they might not even go to the junk mail for a long time, or it gets put into some other box that isn't appropriate. So this is absolutely the best of support this or support that, or the topic that you're talking about, support reproductive rights in Florida, whatever that topic is.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for that detail, because I think a lot of people don't realize that you might be in an office of 3 people and having to sort through 1,000 emails a day. So it's not
Yes,
even necessarily they don't care.
it's not that they don't care. It's really a bandwidth issue. Most offices just don't have that much staff. And yes, Laura, a bill number is a good subject line, but I would put in there if you support it or oppose it. Or if it's more like I really want to talk about it, you could say, set meeting to discuss such and such bill. And it will still get like put, depending on how they have their software set up, but it would probably still get put with that bill.
Yeah, if it's a meeting request, I usually put request for a
Yeah.
meeting to discuss, the bill. But if you're just emailing about the bill, you don't have the intention of having a conversation or a meeting, then you just want to have support or oppose.
Right.
And if there's a name for the bill, like, Save Our Care Act, you could put that too. If it's like a well-known bill, it's always good to have the bill number and the title as well. So just like the phone call, you're starting with your name, fact that you're constituent, where in the district you live, leading with your ask, top talking points, how it connects to you personally, reiterating that ask at the end, right? So same formula as the phone call and frankly the meeting. You might have a little bit more information than you would have, because a phone call, you don't want it to be too long. So you can elaborate maybe a little bit more on the talking points and the personal story, but still keep it short. And by the way, I forgot to mention this earlier for the meeting. For those leave behind materials, make sure those things are like 1 or 2 pages, right? Because if you share, like, you shouldn't be printing out things that are like a whole, a whole study or a whole thing. Anything that is more than 2 pages, they are not going to read. And it's the same thing with phone calls, with emails. You just need to keep these things very concise because of what Katie was mentioning earlier. Like, there's just not a lot of bandwidth, and you don't want to get lost in the shuffle. You want your effort, you want to be actually heard. So just provide it in the best, most concise way that you can. Especially with emails, I really like to use bullet points, like, to make it visually easy to read. If you have big chunky paragraphs, people, their eyes glaze over, right? So even just like having short paragraphs and bullet points makes it a lot easier for the staff to read. All right, so you now have very detailed information on how to schedule, prepare, have a meeting, do the phone calls, do the emails. So now we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the things we're seeing in Florida that you could be active on. I know that the session just ended, but a lot of these issues I'm sure are going to come up next year. And a lot of this relationship building, it takes time. So now is actually a really good time to be reaching out to elected officials about bill, even if the bills aren't active now, to talk about the issues you care about, and build that relationship up to the next session, because by that time you're not starting fresh with that office. They've already heard from you all of this year, and then you'll be in a really good position to influence them in the next session. So I don't have to tell the Floridians in this group that religious freedom is very much under attack in Florida, and it's certainly not the only state. I just pulled 3 specific bills that I wanted to bring attention to in case you weren't already aware. We have the Creating Civil Liability to Death of Unborn Child bill that it did not advance. It died in the last session. That bill in Florida would have opened the door for civil lawsuits for damages against pregnant people who terminated their pregnancy or miscarried, or against healthcare providers who are providing abortion care. So this is basically, allowing everyday citizens, kind of similar, I think, to that Texas bill that we heard about, for people to be sued because they had a miscarriage or because they had an abortion. So really further criminalizing, although I shouldn't say criminalizing because this is a civil liability, but just opening people up to being sued when they're already dealing with, a miscarriage or a terminated pregnancy. Just unbelievable that this is even being considered. But, it died in the last session, but we can expect these kinds of things to continue being introduced. So it's important to be talking to your elected officials about why this should remain dead, and it's something that they should oppose in the next session, and how bills like this really impact people. The second one I want to share, which unfortunately did pass, and I don't believe it's been signed yet, but I think we can expect the governor to sign it. Maybe if Floridian here can share with me any other updates, but the allowing chaplains in public schools. This has been a major trend in the last and current session in states across the country, is these chaplain bills. So what it does is it doesn't mandate chaplains, but it allows school districts to decide if they want unlicensed, untrained volunteer religious chaplains to serve as school counselors in K-12 schools. So imagine, it's basically a way for schools to just get rid of like actually qualified school counselors who provide really essential mental health and counseling support to kids, and bringing in people who are likely going to proselytize, because the organization behind these bills is led by people who, that is their goal. They want to get into the schools so they can have chaplains proselytize to children. And the people who advocate for this say that that's not true and that it's optional, all that stuff, but it's really a chipping away, right? It's opening the door for all of this stuff.
Sarah, I hate to
Yes.
be the person to do this, but I'm going to rush you along a
Oh,
little
yes,
bit because
okay.
we're
Yes,
down
thank
to
you, thank you,
about
thank you.
5 minutes.
Okay, you can read about this and we can send the slides later. So I won't go into all these bills, but these are 3. So very important to talk to your electeds about this. I'll just rush through very quickly. For those of you who aren't familiar, and if religious freedom and separation of church and state is important to you, you should know that there's a Congressional Free Thought Caucus co-chaired by Congressman Huffman and Congressman Raskin. You can see here, this is the actual mission from the website of the Free Thought Caucus, which does include to protect the secular character of our government, and defending separation of church and state. And I put at the bottom there two bills that the Free Thought Caucus has been supporting that have to do with religious freedom issues. So those are bills that you can call your member of Congress and say, I urge you to support the Health Share Transparency Act or the Stop Female Genital Mutilation Act. So there are positive things being pushed proactively by people who support real religious freedom in Congress. And I have here a sample phone script. I think we could just send this in slides later. I'm not going to go into it, but it has all of these elements, right? Like all the things that we talked about, starting with your name constituent, the thing that you're calling about, an example of a few talking points, and ending with the ask. So you'll have this as a resource if you're trying to put something together. And then the last thing I want to talk about before I wrap and we take questions is just coming back to religious freedom. You know, we often think about religious freedom in terms of just the culture war issues, and absolutely, you know, at the tip of the spear is reproductive and women's rights, LGBTQ rights. You know, this IVF in the news recently. I mean, that's just an extension of the same thing that the judge in that case was talking about religion, was talking about the Bible's definition of life at conception, right? These attacks on access to IVF and abortion are imposing a narrow view of Christianity on everybody. That doesn't represent all Christians, and it doesn't represent non-believers, and it doesn't represent the Jewish community. It's imposing and codifying specific religious beliefs and imposing them on everybody. But these are not the only issues related to religious freedom. So I have a few examples here. Religious freedom impacts immigration and refugee rights. We all remember the Muslim ban, which is just a religious test. We have, you know, the rise of white Christian nationalism stoking a lot of racist activity around, you know, anti-CRT, the attack in Florida on diversity, inclusion, and equity and inclusion. It impacts access to secular education, even things like the climate crisis, because there is a Venn diagram between science denial and undermining scientific integrity coming from Christian nationalists. So, you know, I don't want to spend too much time on this because we're running out of time, but really the point here is all of these issues have to do with religious freedom, and all of them tie into the importance of protecting secular government and speak to our Jewish values as well. So I will stop there. Thank you, Katie, for letting me know, and I'm happy to take questions.
Anybody have any questions? Sarah, can you stop sharing screen for a minute?
Yes.
Wonderful. If you have any questions, write them in the chat. Let me ask you a question, Sarah. In Florida, the capital is really far from most people. So do you think it's valuable for people to call and try and set up an in-district meeting? What about attending town halls and coffee hours?
Yeah, I do think that you know, I think it's unreasonable to expect people to drive to the Capitol. Of course, it's great if you can do that, especially a lot of groups do advocacy days, but I think it's perfectly great to just meet with the district office. And also, if you meet with the district office, you can also then call, you know, the office in the Capitol and email them and reference the fact that you've met with the district office, right? So you can kind of really build on that in-person meeting at the district level. But I'm really glad you mentioned town halls and coffee, because what I would encourage all of you to do is, after you find out who your elected officials are, where their offices are, sign up for their newsletter. Follow them on social media, because they do lots of events where you can meet them in person, constituent coffees, town halls, and that's a great way to meet them in person, and to meet their staff, because they're usually staffed at those events as well. And if you meet a staffer at an event, ask for their card. It has the same impact as that in-person meeting.
Often at the coffee hours, when we were doing coffee hours, we might only have 10 people there. So you come with a bunch of your group, a bunch of your friends, you have a whole hour to really discuss an issue. So those are really useful events.
Absolutely. And I'm still here and I'm listening. I have to plug in my computer so I do not lose all of you, but I'm here.
Okay, well, we have one good question, and Barbara, I think that's a great question. I live in an 85% Democratic, liberally minded district. How can I have the most impact? I've got a thought. Sarah, do you want to jump in, or you want me
Yes,
to
if you could start, please do.
Okay. All right. Two things for that. One, the senator needs, or whoever, the state legislator needs backing. They need to know that you do support them because they're going to get a lot of people saying they don't. So you know, even though you, let's say your elected official strongly believes all chairs should be turned green and you support all chairs turning green, you should come and tell them that. You can email them that, get your friends to email them that, because they're going to be hearing from the side that wants to turn the chairs red. But you don't necessarily hear from the people who agree. So it's really important to do that and have their back so that they can say to their caucus, because they get a lot of pressure from the caucus to vote certain ways. I've got constituents who really support this. I'm going to vote for this, turning chairs red, because this is what my constituents want too.
I agree, 100% agree with all of that. Don't be the silent majority, because when the moment that we think it's covered, it is not, right? Because you're probably not the only person thinking that you can just be apathetic, or that you could just let other people do it. Don't assume that other people are doing the work. The other thing I would say is, because I get this question a lot, especially in blue states, where they think, well, what's the point? We don't have any issues here. And my response to that is, well, what have they done for you lately, right? If they're already an ally, make them a champion, right? Because there's a big difference. So if you feel like you have someone who's aligned with your values, they could be doing a lot more than just supporting, the issues that you're aligned with. They could be introducing bills, right? They could be moving things forward, moving the conversation forward on other issues. So, I would say that, you're very lucky if you have an elected official who's aligned with your values. So ask them to do even more.
Yeah. And there's a question, I want to answer kind of two questions at once. Chuck, you asked, can you arrange Zoom meetings with reps and staff? Absolutely. We used to have tons of Zoom meetings, and staff actually in many ways prefer it because it's easier.
Yes.
Rick, you asked about, how do you adapt your approach to captured legislators where liberal legislators have no influence? I have several answers to that. One, don't 100% assume they have no influence, because an individual legislators develop friendships. My boss had friendships with people on the other side of the aisle. So can they have maybe a huge influence? Maybe not, but they might be able to have a little bit of an influence, which can change an issue. And there's also a lot of things that are administrative and not necessarily legislative that the legislators can have influence on. For example, I served in the minority, but my boss was on appropriations. So we had a school district come to us and say, this little line in the appropriations bill is costing us $3 million. We couldn't have gotten a new bill in, but we were able to get that little line changed and saved that school district $3 million. So there are ways that a legislator can make a difference. And then the third thing is prepping for when you are in the majority. There's a lot of work to getting bills done. It can take years to get a bill from thought to passing. So while your legislator might be in the minority right now, they can start working on legislation, having meetings with stakeholders, having meetings with constituents, doing the legwork to get the legislation ready so that in a couple years it can go through. Example again is Michigan. My boss was very active in the gun violence prevention. In fact, she was the chair of the gun violence prevention caucus. We worked a lot on gun violence prevention legislation, which went nowhere. But the second Michigan flipped, that legislation, it still had some more work to do, but that legislation then started moving. But having all that background done on it was very helpful. So I
Absolutely.
think, Sarah, do you have any closing statements? It's 5:05 and we'll close up in a second here.
I will just say that if not you, then who, right? We really need to be active. Don't assume that other people are doing this. Very few people are doing this, and we need your voices. Don't give up. I know, especially the Floridians here, I know it's tough. It feels like an uphill battle, but just know that when it comes to the issues we're discussing, the majority of Americans are with us on this. And unfortunately, sometimes things have to get worse before they get better. I could just tell you, I just presented to an affiliate of SHJ last weekend. And one of the things we were talking about was school boards. They have a lot of school boards that were taken over by Christian nationalists who were enacting these book bans and all that kind of thing. But you know what? People started showing up at the school board meetings who were never involved. And no matter how much pressure they put on those school board members, those school board members were ramming through those policies, and things were bad for a few years, but people kept showing up. And because they started showing up, they built a grassroots infrastructure. And guess what? The moment those school board members who had pissed off the entire community and ignored their concerns, the community that whole time during their term was getting organized, and then they voted them out. And they had record turnout that they've never seen in that school board election in those districts. So don't underestimate even the practice of doing these meetings and recruiting other constituents to do them with you. You're building power over time. It is a long game. So don't be intimidated. Please get involved, and we're happy to work with you if you're ever interested. Katie is our national coordinator, and we're happy to work with any groups or individuals that want to get more involved in Jews for Secular Democracy's work.
And that's it. Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate your being here. Spread the word. We hope you share this information. If you would like a copy of the PowerPoint, email me. It's Katie. I'll type it in here real quick. It's katie@jfasad.org. That's it. Good night, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night. Thank you.